I went to my husband's secret apartment to catch him cheating. Instead, I found a shrine dedicated to me and a suitcase full of my missing clothes. I went to my husband's secret apartment to catch him cheating. That was the plan. That was the whole plan. Find the apartment, get inside, find the woman, take the photos, call the attorney. Clean, painful, finished. The kind of ending that hurts, but that you can at least understand because it follows a logic you recognize. Man lies to wife, wife finds out, marriage ends, the world continues turning. That was what I was prepared for. I was not prepared for what I actually found. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building 20 minutes from our house. I had found the address 3 days earlier in a jacket pocket, a key, a folded piece of paper with a unit number, the specific carelessness of a man who had been doing something secret for long enough that he had stopped being careful. I had held that key in my hand for 3 days and said nothing and planned everything. I went on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew he would be at work until 7. I let myself in. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not perfume, not the smell of another woman or another life. Something familiar, something that took me a moment to place and then placed itself with a clarity that made my stomach drop. It smelled like our home. The same candle, the same fabric softener, the specific combination of scents that I had never thought about consciously because they were simply the smell of my life, the background of every day, the olfactory wallpaper of my existence. And it was here, in this apartment I had never been to, filling rooms I had never seen. I turned on the light, and the walls were covered in photographs of me. Not photographs from our life together, not wedding photos, not vacation photos, not the pictures you frame and hang in a home you share. These were photographs taken without my knowledge. I am asleep in some of them. I am in the shower in others. I am in my car, at my desk, in the garden, in the kitchen, reading by the window in the early morning in my nightgown. Hundreds of them. Every piece of clothing I had lost that year, the green cardigan I had searched the whole house for, the dress I had assumed went missing at the dry cleaner, the boots I had convinced myself I must have donated and forgotten. All of it, folded, packed, in a suitcase by the door. A suitcase that was not open the way you pack a suitcase for a trip. A suitcase that was closed and latched and ready. And then the light clicked off. And from the corner of the room, in the dark, in the voice I had heard every day for 9 years and suddenly did not recognize. You weren't supposed to find your new home yet. My blood did not run cold. That is not the right description. It became something else entirely, something that is not a temperature at all, something that happens in your body when your brain receives information it does not have a category for and has to build one from nothing in the space of a single second. I understood, standing in the dark of that apartment with the photographs on the walls and my clothes in that suitcase, that I had not walked into evidence of an affair. I had walked into something I did not yet have the right word for. And the man in the corner, my husband, the man I had slept beside for 9 years, was between me and the door. My name is Natalie Ashford, and if you are listening to this right now, I need you to stay with me for every single second of what I am about to tell you, because what I walked into on that Tuesday afternoon changed not just my life, but my understanding of what a life can hide inside it, what a person you share a bed with can be building in the spaces you cannot see. And before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you are listening from right now, because this story is not about one city or one country or one kind of marriage. It is about what happens when you think you know someone completely and discover that the person you knew was a performance, and behind the performance was something else entirely, something that had been building for a very long time. Tell me where you are. I read every single comment, and tonight, I need to know you are there. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, the youngest of 2 children, in a house on a street where everyone knew everyone, and the summers lasted long enough to feel endless, and the winters were cold enough to make you appreciate the summers completely. My mother, Carol, was a librarian. My father, James, was a high school history teacher. We were not wealthy. We were something more valuable than wealthy. We were specific. Our house had a personality, books on every surface, maps on the walls, a kitchen that was always in the middle of some project, a father who could make any historical event sound like the most urgent thing that had ever happened, and a mother who believed that every answer to every question you would ever have was already written down somewhere, and your job was to find it. I was a quiet child, observant, the kind of child who sits at the edge of a room and watches the room before deciding to enter it. My teachers called this shy. My mother called it careful. I grew up believing my mother. I studied English literature at UNC Chapel Hill. I spent 4 years reading things that cracked me open and putting myself back together slightly differently each time, which is what a liberal arts education is actually for, regardless of what anyone tells you about career preparation. I graduated with an understanding of narrative, of how stories work, of how people construct meaning, of how the stories we tell about our lives shape what we are able to see and what we are not. I became a book editor, first at a small press in Chapel Hill, then at a mid-size publisher in Charlotte, then at a larger house in Atlanta, which is where I was living when I met Callum Ashford at a friend's dinner party on a September evening when the heat was finally breaking and everything felt like the beginning of something. Callum. I need to tell you about Callum, because this story is about him, but it is also about what I did not see, and what I did not see is inseparable from who he presented himself to be. Callum. Who he appeared to be. Callum Ashford was 34 when I met him. I was 31. He was a structural engineer, the kind who works on historic buildings, reinforcing and preserving old structures, keeping things standing that were in danger of falling apart. I remember thinking when he told me this that there was something poetic in it, a man whose profession was saving what was worth saving. I was not wrong that there was poetry in it. I was wrong about what kind. He was tall and quiet and precise in the way of people who work with structures, who understand load and stress and the exact tolerances of things, who have a deep and functional relationship with the concept of things holding together versus falling apart. He chose his words the way he chose everything, carefully, specifically, never more than was required. At that dinner party, he sat across from me and we talked for 3 hours about books he had read and buildings he had worked on and the specific way that old structures, when you opened them up to repair them, sometimes revealed things about how they were originally built that changed your understanding of what the building was for. I thought that was the most interesting thing I had ever heard a man say at a dinner party. I think about that sentence now differently. He pursued me slowly and completely, not with grand gestures, with attention, the specific, unwavering, total quality of attention that made you feel like the only thing in his field of vision. He remembered everything. Every book I mentioned, every preference, every small detail I offered in conversation, he filed it, he referenced it later. He built a version of me from my own words and reflected it back to me in ways that made me feel extraordinarily, almost uncomfortably seen. I say uncomfortably now. Then I said it was the feeling of being known. We dated for 2 years. We moved in together. We got married at 34 and 37 in a small ceremony in the mountains outside Asheville, my parents' territory, with 100 people and a reception in a barn and a first dance to a song he had chosen, and he said had reminded me of since the moment he heard it, that I had never heard before, but that I loved. He had chosen it because it was a song about watching someone from a distance. I did not hear that in the lyrics then. I hear it now. The marriage. The first years. The first 3 years of our marriage were, by any observable measure, good. Callum was a devoted husband in the category of devotion that announces itself through action rather than declaration. He maintained our home with the same precision he brought to his professional structures. He cooked on the nights I worked late, which was frequently, because editing is not a 9-to-5 profession, and deadlines are not considerate of personal schedules. He kept track of things I needed, medications refilled before they ran out, appointments I had mentioned and forgotten, small practical details of a shared life that he managed so seamlessly I stopped noticing they needed managing. I thought this was partnership. I thought this was what good marriage looked like when you had chosen a person whose particular skill set complemented yours. He was attentive in ways that, looking back, I should have examined more carefully. He did not like it when I traveled for work without him. He expressed this not with anger. Callum never expressed anything with anger, I want you to understand that, because the absence of anger in a person is something we are taught to read as safety when it is not safety. He expressed this with a quiet withdrawal, a slight cooling, a period of distance that would end when I returned and be replaced with warmth complete that I would find myself, without fully realizing it, preferring to not travel rather than experience the withdrawal. That's how it started. That's how these things always start, not with a locked door, with a temperature. He did not like my friendships with certain people, men primarily, but not exclusively. He expressed this with the same quiet withdrawal and the same restoration of warmth when I recalibrated. Within 3 years of our marriage, I had, without any single dramatic moment I could point to, significantly reduced my social circle. I had friendships that were shallower than they had been. I had a work life and a home life, and very little that existed in the space between them. And I called this being settled, being adult, growing out of the need for things that mattered less as other things mattered more. I called it contentment. My mother, Carol, called it something different. Carol, who had watched me through 36 years with the attention of a librarian, cataloging, cross-referencing, comparing what was on the shelf now with what had been on the shelf before, called me once in the 2nd year of our marriage and said very gently, "Natalie, are you happy?"
I said, "I'm very happy. Why?" "You seem further away than you used to," she said. "That's all." I assured her. She said she believed me. I do not know whether she believed me or whether she loved me enough to let me believe myself. The things I was losing, I did not notice losing. That is the particular cruelty of slow and careful control. It moves at the pace of natural change. It is dressed in the ordinary clothes of a life simply evolving. You do not see the shape of it until you are far enough inside to look back and measure the distance from where you started. It started with small things, as it always does. The green cardigan. I had owned it for 6 years. It was the color of deep water, and it had been a birthday gift from my mother, and I wore it so often it had become, in the way of certain objects, an extension of myself. I went to reach for it one morning, and it was not in the closet. I looked everywhere. I assumed I had left it somewhere. I looked for 3 weeks and then stopped looking because at some point you accept that a thing is gone. 3 months later, a dress, burgundy, wool, bought on a trip to Edinburgh 3 years before I met Callum, also gone. I checked the dry cleaner. I checked the car. I retraced and could not find it. And then the boots, a pair of brown leather ankle boots that I had worn the week before and that were gone from the shoe rack on a Thursday morning when I reached for them. And then a scarf, a blouse, a coat. One by one, across the span of approximately 8 months, pieces of my wardrobe disappeared. Not in a pattern I recognized, not all the same type of item, not from the same location, just gone. The way things go when you are a slightly disorganized person who moves through a full life without tracking inventory. I am not a disorganized person. I never have been, but I explained it away because the alternative explanation required looking at something I was not ready to look at. And then there was the photograph. I found it by accident in the autumn. I was looking for a document in Callum's desk, a utility bill, something administrative, something he usually handled but that I needed that afternoon. His desk was organized in the way of his whole life, precise, structured, everything in a specific place. I found the bill, and behind it, in a folder that was not labeled and that I would not have opened except that it fell when I pulled the bill out and the contents partially spilled, a photograph of me, asleep, in our bedroom, in our bed, taken from the doorway, from a distance, with the quality of a photograph taken without flash in low light, grainy, slightly blurred, but unmistakably me and unmistakably our bedroom, and unmistakably taken without my knowledge. I put it back. I put the folder back. I told myself a story about it that I will not repeat, because the story was so thin that telling it now would embarrass me. I told myself a story, and I closed the desk drawer, and I made dinner, and I did not say anything. But I knew. In the way you know things before you know them. In the way the body registers truth before the mind has agreed to receive it. I knew something was wrong. I did not yet know the shape of it.
It was a Monday when I found the key. I was taking Callum's jacket to the dry cleaner, his charcoal wool jacket, the one he had wore to client meetings that he had asked me to drop off. I checked the pockets the way you'd check pockets before dry cleaning, and my hand found a key and a folded piece of paper. The key was small, brass, the kind that belongs to a door, not a car, not a padlock, the kind that belongs to an apartment. The piece of paper had an address and a unit number. Nothing else. I stood in the hallway of our home with a dry cleaning jacket over my arm and a key in my hand, and I felt the knowledge I had been managing for months arrive fully and finally, the way weather arrives, not with announcement, but with the sudden fact of itself. He had a separate apartment. I did not confront him. I want to explain this choice because I know that some people would have asked immediately, would have held up the key across the dinner table and demanded an answer. I did not do that because I had spent 9 years married to a man who was extraordinarily skilled at reframing, at taking the question behind the question and returning it to you in a shape you no longer recognized. If I confronted Callum with the key, he would construct an explanation, and the explanation would be delivered with such precision and such calm that I would find myself, as I had found myself before, doubting the clear evidence of my own perception. I needed to see it for myself, before he could explain it away. I took the jacket to the dry cleaner. I came home. I made dinner, I went to bed beside him, and I lay in the dark, and I planned. For 3 days, I planned. On the 3rd day, a Tuesday when he would not be home until 7, I went to the address on the paper with the key in my hand, and I let myself in. The smell hit me first, as I told you, the smell of my own home in a place that was not my home. I stood in the small entryway and I took it in before I turned on the light, the particular quality of a space that has been inhabited, not just visited, inhabited, the warmth of a place that someone has been in recently, the settled silence of rooms that are used. I turned on the light. The living room was immaculate, Callum's precision everywhere, the furniture arranged with the spatial intelligence of a structural engineer, every object in a relationship with the objects around it, the whole room a kind of composition. A sofa I did not recognize, a reading chair in a fabric I had once told him I loved at a shop we had passed, a comment I barely remembered making. He had remembered. And the walls. I need to tell you about the walls the way they actually were, not the way panic compresses memory, because the full truth of it matters.
The photographs were not haphazardly pinned. They were arranged with the care of an exhibition, or a shrine, which is the right word I have used since, and is the right word. There were photographs printed in different sizes, some framed, some mounted directly. They covered not the entire wall, but specific sections, a gallery arrangement above the sofa, a denser cluster near the window, a single large photograph centered above the fireplace. The large photograph above the fireplace was me in the garden of our home on what I recognized, from the quality of the light and the clothes I was wearing, as a Sunday morning in late spring. I was not looking at the camera. I was looking at something off to the left. A bird, I think. There had been a bird in the garden that morning that I had watched for a long time, because it was a species I had not seen before. I am looking at a bird in a photograph I did not know was being taken, centered above a fireplace in an apartment I did not know existed. I moved through the room slowly. The photographs from the bedroom, me asleep, me in partial undress, me in the specific vulnerability of a person who is unconscious in what they believe is a private space, these were not displayed in the living room. I found them in the bedroom, which was through a door to the left. The bedroom. I want to be careful about how I describe the bedroom, because I want to be accurate, and accuracy in this case requires steadiness. The bedroom contained a bed made with the precision of everything else Callum did. On the nightstand were books, my books, the ones I had mentioned loving, some of which I owned copies of at home, some of which I did not. There was a glass of water on the nightstand, fresh, which meant he had been here recently. There was a candle, my candle, the scent from our home. And on the dresser, arranged with the same care as the photographs on the walls, were objects I recognized. A hairbrush I had thought was lost, a perfume bottle from my bathroom, a pair of earrings I had searched for and could not find, small objects from my life, relocated here, arranged on a surface in an apartment I did not know existed, as though this were the home, and our home were the copy. And by the door, the suitcase. Dark green, large, the kind you pack for a long trip or a permanent one, closed and latched and, when I crouched and opened it, filled with my clothes, folded with Callum's precision, layered with the tissue paper he knew I used for certain fabrics. My green cardigan was on top. I held it in my hands, 6 years old, the color of deep water, a birthday gift from my mother. I was still holding it when the light went out. The light went out and I did not scream. I want to tell you that I screamed because it would be the natural thing to do and it would make a satisfying moment in the telling, but I did not scream. I went entirely silent in the way that prey animals go silent, not from bravery, from the ancient instinctive understanding that sound, in certain moments, is the worst possible thing. I was crouched by the suitcase. I straightened slowly. My eyes were adjusting to the dark, which was not complete. There was light from the street coming through the curtains, enough to see shapes, enough to understand the geography of the room. The voice came from the corner to my right, the corner furthest from the door. From the reading chair, his reading chair, placed there with that spatial precision, oriented toward the bed. You weren't supposed to find your new home yet. His voice, Callum's voice, measured and quiet and completely, horrifyingly calm. I did not respond immediately. There are moments in a life when the thing that saves you is not what you say, but the second you take before you say it. That second in which your mind, operating at a speed that your body has not caught up to yet, calculates everything available. He was in the corner. I was by the suitcase. The door was behind me, to my left. He was not between me and the door. I turned my body, slowly, toward the door. Natalie. Callum, I said, you weren't supposed to be here yet. Yet, I said. You said yet. A pause. I was going to bring you here when it was ready,
when everything was the way it needed to be. My hand found the doorframe. "The suitcase," I said, and my voice was steadier than I had any right to expect it to be. "You packed my clothes." "For you," he said. "Everything here is for you. This is all for you, Natalie." "Callum, I need to—" "You're not supposed to leave," he said, and the calmness in his voice was the most frightening thing in the room, more frightening than the dark, more frightening than the photographs. Because anger has a logic you can work with. Anger escalates and de-escalates. It has a temperature you can measure and manage. What I heard in his voice was not anger. It was the absolute stillness of a fixed point, the voice of someone describing something that simply was, the way a load-bearing wall simply is, the way gravity simply is. "You're not supposed to leave," he said. "You're home." My hand found the door handle. I turned it. I went through the door. I did not look behind me because looking behind me required a fraction of a second that I could not afford, and because what was in front of me, the corridor, the elevator, the stairs, the street, was the only thing that mattered. I took the stairs. I was in my car with the doors locked before I allowed myself to feel anything at all. And then I called Daniel Reeves. Daniel Reeves, who he was and why it mattered. Daniel Reeves is a detective with the Atlanta Police Department. He is also the older brother of my closest friend, Simone, who I had known since we were both 22 and working entry-level publishing jobs in Charlotte and sharing an apartment that was too small and a friendship that was the exact right size. I had his number because Simone had given it to me years earlier in the context of a neighborhood safety conversation, and I had kept it the way you keep certain numbers, with the specific low-level awareness that you hope you never need it, and the equally specific awareness that you might. I called him from the car, locked doors, engine running, my hands not entirely steady on the phone. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you safe right now? Are you in the building?" "I'm in my car outside the building." "Drive away from the building. Don't go home. Drive somewhere public and stay there and tell me where you are. I'm coming." I drove to a coffee shop 4 blocks away. I sat at a table by the window where I could see the street in both directions. I ordered something I did not drink. I sat with my hands around the cup and waited. Daniel arrived in 20 minutes. He sat across from me and he asked me everything with the systematic thoroughness of a person who does this professionally, who understands that the order of details matters, and emotion, however legitimate, needs to be held to the side while the facts are assembled. I told him everything: the key, the address, what I had found inside, the photographs, the suitcase, my missing belongings, the words from the corner. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Natalie, when did things start going missing?" "About 8 months ago." "And the photograph you found in his desk?" "About 6 months ago." Has there been any physical—" "No, never, not once." He nodded. He was thinking in a way I could see, not dramatically, just the particular quality of attention of someone sorting information into categories. "What you're describing," he said carefully, "has a name. Several of the elements you're describing are consistent with a pattern of behavior that we take very seriously. The apartment, the photographs, the personal belongings. I want to be precise with you because you deserve precision. This is not the behavior of someone having an affair." "I know," I said. "This is something more concerning." "I know," I said again. "I understood that in the apartment." He looked at me. "You're very calm." "I'm not calm," I said. I'm holding the calm in front of everything else because if I put it down right now, I won't be useful. I'll be calm later. Right now, I need to be useful." He nodded once. "Okay," he said, "then let's work." The investigation. What the police found. Daniel moved carefully and correctly, which I was grateful for because this was not a situation where moving fast served anyone except the wrong person. He obtained a warrant for the apartment. What the search found, documented and inventoried by people who do this for a living, was more extensive than what I had seen in my few minutes inside. The photographs numbered over 400, taken across a period that the investigators estimated, based on evidence within the photographs, the seasons, my changing haircuts, what I was wearing, at approximately 3 years. 3 years of photographs I did not know were being taken in our home, in my car, at my workplace, in public spaces. The personal belongings recovered included 37 individual items of clothing, 12 pieces of jewelry, and a number of small objects, the hairbrush, the perfume, the earrings that I confirmed as mine. There were journals. Callum kept journals, which I had known, which had seemed in the context of our life together like a private and unremarkable habit. I had never looked at them. The investigators looked at them. I have been told the content of relevant sections, and I will tell you only this. The journals documented, in the same precise language Callum brought to everything, a plan. Not a violent one, I want to be accurate, not something with an explicit harm at its center. A plan for a life. A plan in which I had been assigned a role without my knowledge or consent. A plan that had been refined over years. A plan in which the apartment was a step, the suitcase was a step, the gradual reduction of my external connections was a step, a plan in which I was the fixed point around which everything else was constructed. The investigators also found something I had not seen during my time in the apartment, in the closet, a collection of items belonging to me that were more personal than clothing, medical records that could only have come from accessing our home files, financial documents, my passport. My passport had been in my desk drawer at home. I had not noticed it was missing because I had not had reason to look for it recently. It had been there for years, familiar and ignored, and now it was in a closet in an apartment 20 minutes from our house. Daniel called me when they found the passport. He said, "Natalie, I need you to stay where you are. Don't go home. I'm sending someone to you." "What did you find?" A pause, the kind that tells you more than the words that follow it. "Enough," he said. "We have enough." Callum was taken into custody the following morning.
I spent that night at Simone's house. Simone, who I had maintained a friendship with across 9 years of marriage, in spite of the gradual narrowing that Callum's management of my social world had produced, because Simone was the kind of friend who does not accept being managed out of someone's life gracefully. She had shown up, persistently, creatively, with the stubborn loyalty of someone who has decided that you matter and is not going to be rerouted. She had pushed back on the scheduling difficulties and the cancellations and the Callum-adjacent friction of trying to maintain a close female friendship inside a marriage that subtly discouraged it. She had kept showing up. I had sometimes felt guilty about how much the friendship cost her in that effort. Sitting in her living room that night, I felt something different. I felt the specific, overwhelming gratitude of someone who understands, now, what the maintenance of that friendship actually meant, what it had preserved, what it had kept alive in me that might otherwise have been managed entirely away. She made tea. She sat with me. She did not ask me to perform okayness for her comfort. At about 2 a.m, I said, "There were over 400 photographs." "I know," she said. "Daniel told me." 3 years.
Yes, I was in my own home. She did not say anything to that. There was nothing to say to that. She reached over and put her hand on mine, and we sat in the quiet of her living room while the city did what cities do at 2 in the morning, which is continue existing with complete indifference to the things that are happening inside the people moving through it. At some point I said, I kept telling myself it would be something I recognized, that when I found out what he was hiding, it would be something I could fit into a story I already knew, an affair, a debt, something with a shape. And instead, Simone said, instead, it was me, I said. The secret was me. She held my hand tighter. That is the strangest thing, I said. Not that he was hiding something, that what he was hiding was a version of my own life that he was building without me, that I was the subject and the secret at the same time. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, my mother was right. I was further away than I used to be. Call her in the morning, Simone said. Yes, I said, first thing. The legal process. What followed? I will not walk you through every step of the legal process because the legal process is slow and procedural and does not make for clean storytelling, and because some of it remains active in ways that constrain what I can say publicly. What I can tell you is that Callum was charged. The specific charges I will not detail, but they included elements related to stalking, unlawful surveillance, and possession of items taken without consent, among other things. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case is in process. I will also tell you that the investigation found things that required the involvement of people beyond the local police, because some of what was documented in those journals involved plans that, while they never materialized, rose to a level of concern that made the involvement of additional agencies appropriate. I leave it at that. What I will tell you is this. The system, when I engaged it, worked. Slowly, imperfectly, with the friction of all bureaucratic systems, but it worked. People took it seriously. Daniel Reeves took it seriously. The investigators took it seriously. My attorney, Catherine Marsh, whom I had never previously needed and who turned out to be exactly the right person for exactly this situation, took it seriously. I want to say that because I know that not everyone's experience with reporting is that the system works. I know that for many people, the system fails, repeatedly and catastrophically. My experience was not the experience of everyone, and I will not present it as universal. What I will say is report, document, find the Daniel Reeves in your life, the person with the expertise and the willingness to take you seriously, and call them, from a locked car if necessary, from a coffee shop 4 blocks away. Make the call. The rebuilding. Who Natalie becomes after. I moved into an apartment in Decatur 6 weeks after that Tuesday. Not our house. I did not want our house. Could not have stayed in our house. Had no relationship with our house except as the location where a person I thought I knew had been documenting my unconscious self for 3 years. I took what was mine and left what was mine to the process of legal dissolution, and I started from a stripped-back version of myself in 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building where I did not know a single person, and found this, after 9 years of being very known, an extraordinary relief. I called my mother the morning after I left Simone's house. Carol, who had noticed I was further away than I used to be, who had loved me enough to say it and loved me enough to let me tell her I was fine and file her concern quietly in the catalog of things she was watching. She came the following weekend. She stayed for 10 days. She brought 3 boxes of books, mine from my childhood, the ones I had left in her house when I moved out at 22, and that she had kept in the order I had left them in the shelves in my old room. She unpacked them into my new apartment without asking, and the smell of them, the specific old paper smell of books I had read at 12 and 14 and 17, filled the apartment in a way that made me cry for reasons I could not articulate, except that it felt like being handed something back. I cried a lot in those first months. Not continuously. I have a job and deadlines and a life that requires showing up, and showing up is a discipline I learned from parents who believed in it. But in the spaces between the showing up, I cried. I cried for the 9 years. I cried for the version of my life I had believed I was living. I cried for the specific grief of having to go back through your own past and reassess what was real in it and what was performance, which is the most disorienting kind of grief because it does not just change your present, it edits your history. I found a therapist named Dr. Rosemary Clark who specializes in exactly this kind of experience, and who asked me in our 3rd session something that I have thought about every day since. She said, "When you were in that apartment, holding your green cardigan in the dark before the voice came from the corner, what did you feel?" I thought about it. "I felt like I had been looking for the wrong thing," I said. "I went there to find another woman, evidence of an ordinary betrayal, and instead I found myself, a version of my life that had been constructed around me without my participation, and what I felt, holding the cardigan, was seen in the most wrong possible way, completely seen and completely erased at the same time." She nodded. "That is a very precise description of what this kind of behavior does to a person. It centers you and obliterates you simultaneously." "Yes," I said, "exactly that." "And what do you need," she said, "to be centered on your own terms? What does it feel like when you are seen in a way that is right?" I had to think about that for a long time, because it is a harder question than it sounds. When you have spent years inside something that framed your own visibility as something that belonged to someone else, reclaiming the right version of being seen requires knowing what that version feels like, and knowing requires trying, and trying requires being willing to be visible again on your own terms, which is frightening after everything. But I tried. I started writing again. I had written in college, essays, some fiction, the kind of writing you do when you are young and everything feels urgent and worth saying. I had stopped gradually in the years of my marriage, for no reason I could name except that writing is a private and self-directed act, and I had been in a life that slowly redirected my privacy outward. I wrote about books first. I started a newsletter for the pure, unmonitored pleasure of writing to no particular audience about the books that were cracking me open and putting me back together differently. Within 6 months, I had more readers than I expected. Within a year, I had a community of people who read and responded and corresponded, and who were, in the aggregate, the most nourishing social world I had inhabited since my early 20s. I got back in touch with people I had lost contact with during the marriage. Not dramatically. I did not call people and explain what had happened and ask to be welcomed back. I simply reached out. Coffee, a book recommendation, a genuine inquiry into how a person was doing. Most of them responded. Some of them folded me back into their lives as though the distance had been a gap in correspondence, rather than a managed withdrawal of a woman inside a controlling marriage. I told some of them the truth. Not all of them needed it, but some of them did, and the conversations I had with people who had wondered what had happened to me, who had assumed the drift was intentional, who were relieved to understand that it was not, those conversations repaired something I was unable to repair alone. What Margaret wants you to know, the lesson. I have spent a significant amount of time since that Tuesday thinking about what I want to say about it, what the lesson is, the thing is that someone needs to hear. And here is where I land, as honestly as I can. The behavior I experienced has a name, and the name matters. It is called stalking, and it is called obsessive behavior, and it sits on a spectrum that runs from the deeply unsettling to the genuinely dangerous, and where any particular person falls on that spectrum is something that trained professionals need to assess. Not you, not me, not the person experiencing it. If you recognize something in what I've described, not necessarily this extreme, but the shape of it, the pattern of it, the gradual reduction of your world, the unexplained disappearances of small things, the feeling of being managed rather than loved, the specific quality of attention that feels more like documentation than affection, I need you to hear this. Your instincts are information. The discomfort you feel in the presence of something that looks fine from the outside but does not feel fine from the inside is not oversensitivity. It is your nervous system doing its job. It is trying to tell you something with the only language it has. Listen to it. And do not wait for certainty before you act. Certainty in these situations often arrives too late and at a too high a cost. You do not need a photograph to confirm what your body already knows. You do not need to be able to explain it perfectly to someone else before you're allowed to take it seriously yourself. Take it seriously. Find your Daniel Reeves, the person who will listen from a place of expertise and take action. Find your Catherine Marsh, the attorney who will build the legal architecture of your protection. Find your Simone, the friend who refused to be managed away and whose living room is available at 2 a.m. These people exist. They exist in your life even if you have not needed them until now. Find them before you need them if you can. Call them the moment you need them if you cannot. The other thing I want to say, and this one is harder to say, is about love, about what love actually is and what it is not. What Callum felt for me was not nothing. I have spent time with this, and I believe it was not nothing. It was real in whatever form it existed in him. But it was not love in the form that is healthy, that is safe, that is the kind worth having. What Callum felt for me was a version of love that had been distorted by something I'm not qualified to diagnose and will not attempt to do. Distorted into something that needed to possess rather than cherish, to document rather than know, to contain rather than be alongside.
Real love does not need a shrine. Real love does not pack your clothes into a suitcase in a secret apartment. Real love does not photograph you sleeping as an act of devotion. Real love is a thing that happens between two people who are both present and both consenting and both free to be themselves within it. If the love you are inside does not feel like freedom, even the small, ordinary freedom of being yourself in your own home, without management, without monitoring, without the slow subtraction of the parts of you that exist independently, then it is worth examining what kind of love it actually is. You are allowed to examine it. You are allowed to find it insufficient. You are allowed to leave it. There is a cardigan in my closet in my apartment in Decatur. Green, the color of deep water. 6 years old, the edges slightly worn in the way of things that have been loved. A birthday gift from my mother, who noticed I was further away than I used to be, and loved me enough to say so, and loved me enough to let me deny it, and loved me enough to come with 3 boxes of books when I finally needed her. I found it in the suitcase by the door of an apartment I was never supposed to see. I carried it out of that apartment in the dark, through a corridor, down 4 flights of stairs, into a parking lot, into a locked car. I have worn it almost every week since. Not as a statement, not as a reclamation gesture or a symbol of survival, or any of the narrative packaging we put around objects to make them mean something larger than they are. I wear it because it is warm, and it is mine, and my mother gave it to me, and those 3 things are enough. Those 3 things have always been enough. I am 39 years old. I am an editor who writes a newsletter that more people read than I expected. I have a therapist who asks the right questions, and friends who kept showing up, and a mother who noticed, and a new apartment that smells like coffee and old books and is arranged entirely according to my own preferences because I live in it alone. And alone, I have discovered, is not the same as lonely. Alone is just you. And you, it turns out, is a more than sufficient place to start. I do not know yet what comes next. I am comfortable, for perhaps the first time in a long time, with not knowing. The next thing will be the thing that comes when I am ready for it, chosen with the full use of a self that belongs to itself. That is enough. That is more than enough. My mother was right. My mind is my most valuable possession, and I have it back.
My name is Natalie Ashford. I went looking for evidence of an ordinary betrayal and found something far stranger and far more clarifying, and came out the other side of it knowing myself better than I have known myself since I was a young woman in Chapel Hill with books cracking her open and no one yet to manage the pieces. If this story reached you today, share it, not just for the story, for the person in your life who is further away than they used to be and has not yet been asked why. For the person whose world has gotten smaller and called it settling. For the person who is listening to their instincts and talking themselves out of it. Share it for them. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me your story. Tell me what you walked away from or what you are still in the middle of walking away from. I read every single one. Trust what you know. Take the stairs if you have to. Thank you for being here tonight.